Good morning, everybody. It is June 27th, 2017, and you're watching On the Open Europe. This is where at MarketStream.live we check out all the action that's happening in Europe. My name is Joseph Cusick with the Cusick Group Securities offered by MoneyBlock. I want to welcome you, and it is an interesting morning. We had ECB President Draghi come out and make some statements, and boy, I'll tell you, Draghi has now woken the hibernating bear bonds. I'm telling you right now, the bears on the bonds have been sleeping while Draghi's statements overnight at a conference, I can't remember what conference it was, made what typically would be considered dovish statements in the past. He's become a little bit of a hawk. That has bond markets in Europe moving to the downside. That's where I want to focus initially this morning because that's the story. You have right now German 10-year bonds down 0.6%. You have French 10-year down 0.8%, and you have the German 10-year down 0.4%. The real story here is that Draghi believes that the current low inflation environment is temporary. That while they're still committed to their policy, he does think that this current environment of low inflation is not something that is long-term. He also believes that the growth rates that is being experienced in Europe will not only be sustained, but he thinks that they're going to accelerate. And so this was interesting action, but the market is definitely not taking it too positively at this juncture. We'll watch FEZ. In full disclosure, I do have my clients exposed to FEZ as far as Europe's concerned, but the UK is down 10 points right now. What's notable in the UK is consumer names are down. A little bit of a mixed action in Asia, so that has basically gotten some consumer names in the UK under pressure, but we are seeing that the energy sector is firming up after what's been quite a volatile couple of weeks, especially in the crude contract. EWU right now, let's see where that opens up on the US Open. That's the ETF that tracks UK stocks. I want to watch that one very closely because if the UK 10-year bonds and bonds in general are starting to unwind, in other words, they are selling those bonds, that money's going to have to start working somewhere, and equities is usually a recipient of those. So we'll watch the equity markets as we get closer to the US Open and throughout the day. Taking a look at the CAC. France, right now, again, you're seeing broad-based weakness across all sectors in the CAC. Down 37 points, that's good for 0.7%. What's notable here is they're now testing their 50-day moving average. This is something we want to keep an eye on. A break of that 50-day moving average, which it's held for the last month and a half, 2 months, would be significant in the French markets, especially since you have this big gap here. Now, I am no technician by any means, but this 50-day moving average is something that I watch as institutional or intermediate term support. If there's an unwind at that level, right now we're at that 52-day moving average at 52.51. It's at 52.56. Watch EWQ on the open. That's an ETF that is also optionable that you can look at to monitor during market hours as well as potentially trade. But watch that weakness. Even though we have the unwind in the bonds, you could see that bonds and the markets could pull back in unison with each other just because of the uncertainty. Taking a look at the DAX. Now, the German DAX is broken through its 20-day moving average. That means that the short-term bulls are on their heels right now. And so I'm going to watch this one very closely. You got to get above 12,700 to get back up above there if the short-term bulls are going to get control. Next level of support that I'm going to watch is 12,587. Now, we're basically a little under 100 points away from that. But with down 91 points, you can see that moving 0.7% in the German DAX is something that is conceivable. Watch EWG on the open here in the United States. It's been struggling to stay above its 50-day moving average. It is right now challenging. It has for the last 5 sessions. Let's see if this weak opening here in Europe signals some potential weakness in the ETF here in the States. And also finally watch the currency, the euro. The euro is really blasted to the upside. You can see this right here. The euro's strength has also been parlayed with dollar weakness here in the States. That is going to continue to weigh on the equity markets despite the fact that you have an unwind in the bond markets. There is just uncertainty. Even though ECB President Draghi came out and said what would be considered hawkish statements going forward, we're still not seeing the inflation. Growth rates are basically in line or flat. And so there is some expectation that maybe things aren't as rosy as one might think. So with that being said, we're going to watch the currency markets for the next leg. Also taking a look at the British pound, finishing up a little higher, needs to get above this 20 and 50-day moving average. BXY is an ETF that you can utilize to monitor that currency. All right, folks, that's it for On the Open in Europe. Join me at 9:30 Eastern, 8:30 Central, where I'm going to be going over everything on the U.S. Opens. It's going to be quite an interesting Open today. See you then.